The 5:47 a.m. PATH train from Jersey City was less a mode of transportation and more a metallic, screeching vessel for shared exhaustion. Ben felt the rhythmic clatter of the tracks in his bones, a familiar vibration that did little to wake him. His world was a study in worn functionality. The strap of his Timbuktu messenger bag, frayed at the edges, dug into the shoulder of his simple, gray Uniqlo blazer. Inside, his company-issued Dell Latitude, a model 3 years past its prime, weighed him down like an anchor. He clutched a lukewarm coffee from a street cart, the bitter, slightly burnt taste a necessary shock to his system. As he emerged into the manufactured canyon of Hudson Yards, the sun glinted off the impossibly clean glass of the surrounding towers, a sterile, blinding light that felt less like a sunrise and more like an interrogation lamp. His own building was a monument to impersonal ambition, a place where the air conditioning was always set to an aggressive chill that seeped through his clothes, a constant reminder of the building's indifference to the human bodies within it. He badged in, the green light a permissive blink, and rode the silent, high-speed elevator, his reflection a pale, tired ghost against the polished steel. The open-plan office on the 48th floor was a quiet sea of muted grays and blues, the low hum of servers and the distant muffled clatter of keyboards the only sounds. His desk was in a corner, a small island of organized chaos in a vast sterile landscape, overlooked and easily ignored. At its center, next to the aging Dell, sat his most essential tool, a worn, black moleskin notebook, its cover soft with use, its elastic band stretched and tired. It held the messy, non-linear architecture of his thoughts, the real work. It held the DNA of Project Titan, a strategy he believed was worth at least $50 million. He didn't hear Alistair approach until the scent of expensive cologne, something citrusy and sharp, like freshly printed money, cut through the stale office air. The shadow fell over his desk before the man himself came fully into view. Alistair didn't walk. He glided, his movements imbued with the frictionless ease of someone who had never waited in a line or worried about rent. His suit was a deep charcoal Italian wool that probably cost more than Ben's entire wardrobe, tailored to perfection. On his wrist, the subtle, unmistakable gleam of a Patek Philippe Calatrava, a quiet declaration of wealth that screamed louder than any sports car. He didn't say good morning. He simply stood there, a silent, judgmental presence, his gaze sweeping over Ben's cluttered desk with a flicker of barely concealed disdain. His eyes lingered for a moment on the worn moleskin, a faint, condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Status update. Titan," he said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth, the words clipped and efficient. He wasn't asking for a conversation. He was issuing a command for data extraction. Ben felt the familiar tightening in his gut, the instinct to shrink, to become smaller. He forced his voice to remain steady, a flat, professional monotone. "The risk-adjusted models are complete. I've stress-tested the core hypothesis against Q4 market volatility projections. It's solid." He opened the notebook, its pages filled with his frantic, spidery handwriting, complex diagrams, and crossed-out equations. The chaotic but brilliant process of true creation. Alistair's eyes glazed over, uninterested in the labor, only the fruit. "Just the executive summary, Ben. I need the key talking points for the board. The vision. They don't need to see how the sausage is made." He tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the notebook, a gesture of both claim and dismissal. The message was clear. Ben's work was the raw, unrefined material. Alistair's role was to polish it, present it, and ultimately, to own it. The injustice was a physical thing, a hot coal in his stomach. If you enjoy stories of karma, hidden secrets, and the quiet power of the underestimated, subscribe now to witness how the truth always finds a way to surface. The weekly strategy meeting was Alistair's theater, and they were all his unwilling cast. The conference room was a glass box overlooking the Hudson, designed to make its occupants feel powerful, like gods gazing down from Olympus. For Ben, it only amplified his own insignificance, making him feel like a specimen under a microscope. He was halfway through explaining a particularly complex facet of the Titan strategy, a predictive algorithm he had built from scratch over hundreds of sleepless hours. He was using the whiteboard, sketching out the flow of logic, the moleskin open on the lectern for reference. For a fleeting moment, he was in his element, the complex data singing in his mind. He could feel the other analysts leaning in, their faces showing genuine comprehension, perhaps even a flicker of admiration. Then, Alistair stood up. He moved to the front of the room with a practiced, predatory grace, gently taking the marker from Ben's hand, as if relieving a child of a sharp object. "Excellent groundwork, Ben. Let me elevate this to the 30-0-0-foot view," he said, his voice resonating with false magnanimity. He erased Ben's intricate diagram with a single dismissive swipe. Then, using slick, empty corporate jargon, he re-articulated Ben's core concepts, simplifying them to the point of caricature, but presenting them as his own profound visionary insights. What Ben's granular analysis is pointing to is what I've been conceptualizing for months: a paradigm shift in asset allocation synergy. The room's attention shifted entirely to Alistair. Ben was no longer the architect of the idea. He was just the bricklayer. He retreated to his seat, his hands feeling strangely empty, the warmth of the marker already a fading memory. He could feel the heat rising in his neck, the bitter taste of humiliation coating his tongue. He looked down at his own notebook, the source of it all. And when he looked up again, he saw Alistair casually pick it up from the lectern, a chilling sense of violation washing over him. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched Alistair walk out of the conference room, his moleskin, his brain, his process, his proof, tucked casually under his arm. Every instinct screamed at him to stand up, to demand it back, but he was frozen in place by the cold, hard calculus of corporate power. A senior analyst did not challenge a vice president, not publicly, not if he wanted to keep his job, his meager $68 salary, his ability to make the rent on his small Jersey City apartment. The minutes stretched into an eternity. He stared at the empty space on the lectern, his stomach a knot of pure dread. What was he doing? Reading it? Copying it? Photographing the pages with his phone? The thought sent a jolt of ice through his veins. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Alistair reappeared. He walked over to Ben's desk and dropped the notebook onto it without a word. The soft thud a sound of absolute contempt. It was a gesture that said, "This is worthless, and so are you." But the violation had already happened. It was that night, fueled by a cold, simmering rage, that Ben solidified a habit he had started months earlier, out of a vague sense of professional caution. He stayed late, long after the cleaning crews had come and gone, the office silent and cavernous. He took the moleskin to the industrial-grade scanner near the HR department. The hum of the machine and the bright, sweeping light of the scanner bar felt clandestine, almost criminal. Page by painstaking page, he created a high-resolution digital archive of his work. He scanned the mind maps, the failed hypotheses, the raw diagrams that formed the very soul of the Titan strategy. He saved each file to a personal, heavily encrypted cloud drive, using a meticulous naming convention that included the date and page number. Then, the final, crucial step. He opened his hypothesis and validation register, a simple spreadsheet where he logged every single one of these scans, cross-referencing them with the exact date and time he had sent a preliminary findings email to Alistair. He was building a fortress of evidence, a digital shadow that mirrored the physical notebook with irrefutable, time-stamped precision. As he saved the final scan of the night, the single page that laid out the entire financial architecture of the proposed merger, a cold, clear thought cut through his anger. Alistair hadn't just been browsing. He had been conducting reconnaissance for the biggest heist of his career. The silence in the due diligence meeting was a different kind of quiet from the empty office at dawn. It was a heavy, pressurized silence, thick with the scent of expensive leather from the partners' briefcases and the low, predatory hum of the conference room's advanced climate control system. The stakes were palpable, a shimmering tension in the air that made the water in Ben's glass seem to vibrate. The acquiring firm's senior partner, a man named Marcus Thorne with eyes that seemed to miss nothing, had just asked the question. It wasn't a softball query about synergy or market share. It was a surgical strike, a highly technical question about a specific risk scenario involving currency fluctuation in an emerging market. A scenario Ben had meticulously modeled and flagged on page 84 of his moleskin. He had spent a full week stress testing that specific variable, and he felt a brief, internal flicker of pride, of validation. He had done the work. He waited for Alistair to deploy the calm, data-backed response Ben had prepared for him, the one that would turn this potential weakness into a demonstration of their team's thoroughness. Instead, he watched a fascinating, horrifying micro-expression unfold on Alistair's face, a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated panic, quickly masked by a veneer of thoughtful consideration. Alistair cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the still room. He turned, his gaze falling upon Ben, not with the camaraderie of a team leader, but with the cold calculation of a general choosing which soldier to sacrifice. "That's an excellent point, Marcus," Alistair said, his voice a smooth, confident balm. Then, the pivot. "Ben, my lead analyst, did flag that as a low-probability outlier." The words landed like stones. Frankly, it was an oversight on his part not to stress-test it further for this presentation. A failure to elevate the data to a strategic level. Ben felt the blood drain from his face. The air in his lungs turned to ice. It was a lie, elegant in its brutality. Alistair was using Ben's own thoroughness against him, framing his diligence as a lack of focus, a failure of judgment. The final sentence was the killing blow. "This is why senior oversight is critical." The message was clear. Ben was the fallible grunt, and Alistair was the indispensable visionary who had just saved the deal from his subordinate's incompetence. The room's focus shifted away from the risk and onto Ben's perceived failure. And in that moment, the years of quiet resentment and simmering frustration in Ben's gut finally cooled into something hard, dense, and dangerously sharp. The walk back from the conference room was a disembodying experience. The plush, sound-dampening carpet seemed to swallow his footsteps, rendering him as silent and invisible as he felt. Colleagues averted their eyes, their faces a mixture of pity and a palpable fear of association. He was now radioactive. Alistair didn't even glance his way, already deep in a self-congratulatory phone call, his laughter echoing down the hallway, a crisp, triumphant sound that scraped against Ben's raw nerves. He sat down at his desk, the worn chair sighing under his weight. The screen of his Dell glowed with the complex models he had built, the very architecture of the strategy that was now being used as a weapon against him. For a long time, he just stared, his mind a white-hot blank. The humiliation was a physical presence, a heat that crawled up his neck and settled behind his eyes. But as the minutes ticked by, the heat began to recede, replaced by an unnerving, profound calm. The shock had burned away the fear. The years of caution, of playing by the rules, of believing that good work was its own reward. It all felt like a naive delusion. He had been a fool. He had meticulously documented his work to protect his ideas, but he now understood that wasn't enough. Proving he was the architect of Project Titan was only half the battle. To survive, and to win, he needed to prove that Alistair was not just a thief, but a fraud, incompetent and dangerous to the company he claimed to lead. The decision crystallized not with anger, but with the cold, clear logic of one of his own algorithms. His existing digital archive was his defense. Now he needed to build his offense. He stayed late, the office emptying around him. The sky outside the vast plate glass windows bleeding from orange to a deep, bruised purple. He wasn't just scanning his notebook tonight. He was going hunting. His target was Alistair's digital lifeblood, his expense reports, his corporate calendar, and the shared project drive where he was notoriously careless with file permissions. He needed to find the rot beneath the polished surface, the pattern of deceit that surely extended beyond just him. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, the familiar clack of the keys about to become the first quiet act of war. The office after 9 p.m. was an alien landscape, a place of deep shadows and strange, echoing sounds. The aggressive hum of the daytime air conditioning softened into a low, mournful sigh. The motion-activated lights in the far corridors would blink on and off, triggered by the passing cleaning crew, creating a disorienting strobe effect that made his heart leap into his throat each time. Ben kept his own desk lamp on, creating a small, isolated pool of light, a tiny island in a vast, dark sea. He felt exposed, his every keystroke a potential beacon to a lurking IT administrator monitoring network activity. His hands were slick with a cold sweat as he navigated the company's labyrinthine server directories. He started with the path of least resistance, a shared marketing folder that Alistair frequently used to dump materials for the design team. It was a digital junk drawer, a place most people ignored. But Ben had a hunch. Alistair's arrogance bred carelessness. He clicked through folders filled with outdated logos and bland presentation templates, his stomach twisting with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Every distant clang of the elevator, every muffled voice from the cleaning staff sent a jolt of panic through him. He was one curious security guard away from having to explain why he was accessing files completely unrelated to his role, at this hour, from his machine. After 20 minutes of fruitless searching, his hope began to wane. Maybe Alistair was smarter than he thought. He was about to log off, to retreat and rethink his strategy, when he saw it. A subfolder, mislabeled simply as Temp Deck Assets. It was a generic name, easily overlooked. But the date-modified stamp was from that very afternoon, just an hour after the disastrous due diligence meeting. His breath caught in his chest. He double-clicked, the system hesitating for a fraction of a second that felt like an eternity. The folder opened, revealing not images or design files, but a small collection of documents. One file name in particular made the hairs on his arms stand up. Titan, Risk Analysis, V2, Internal, Docs. The file he had sent Alistair 3 weeks ago. The one containing the very stress test he had been accused of failing to perform. But there was another file right next to it. A file that had no logical reason to exist. His mouse hovered over the second file, his index finger trembling slightly. The file name was PIP Draft, Ben Carter, Docs, Performance Improvement Plan. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was dated a week ago. Alistair hadn't just thrown him under the bus as a spontaneous act of self-preservation. It was a premeditated execution. He had been building a fraudulent paper trail to justify Ben's dismissal for weeks, all while smiling and accepting his work every morning. The sheer, cold-blooded treachery of it left him breathless. He clicked open the document. There on the screen, illuminated in the cold blue light of the monitor, was his own professional obituary. It was filled with vague, unprovable accusations written in sterile HR speak. Lacks strategic perspective, fails to communicate findings effectively, requires excessive senior oversight. It was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting, twisting his diligence into a flaw and his focus into a weakness. And then he opened the first file, the Titan Risk Analysis V2, Internal, Docs. He used words compare documents feature to run it against his original file saved on his own drive. The screen split, showing the two versions side by side, the differences highlighted in blood red. He saw his own warnings, his detailed risk mitigations, systematically deleted. He saw his nuanced conclusions replaced with Alistair's simplistic, overly optimistic summaries. This was it. The smoking gun. The irrefutable time-stamped proof of not just credit theft, but of willful, malicious data manipulation that put the entire merger at risk. He quickly plugged in a small, discreet thumb drive he kept on his keychain, his movements furtive and precise. As the files copied, the green progress bar creeping across the screen felt like the slowest thing in the world. He copied the PIP draft, the altered presentation, and then, digging deeper into the temporary folder, he found a subfolder containing Alistair's expense reports. He opened the most recent one out of a morbid curiosity, and his blood ran cold for an entirely new reason. Listed under Client Entertainment were a series of lavish dinners at a Michelin-starred restaurant totaling thousands of dollars, with a guest listed as Marcus Thorne, the senior partner from the acquiring firm, dated before the official due diligence had even begun. The faint glow of the monitor painted his face in a pale, ghostly light, the only illumination in the cavernous, sleeping office. Ben's initial shock at the expense reports, the dinners with Marcus Thorne before the deal was even public knowledge, was rapidly being replaced by a more profound and sickening understanding. This wasn't just a simple case of insider dealing or a breach of protocol. It felt deeper, more systemic. He scrolled back, not just weeks, but months, then a full year, then 2. His analyst's brain, trained to find the signal in the noise, took over. The extravagant meals, the first-class flights to conferences Alistair never spoke at, the ludicrously expensive client gifts that lacked recipient names. It was all a pattern of blatant, arrogant fraud. But beneath that layer of common corporate graft, there was another, more disciplined pattern. A recurring line item, always for an amount just shy of the $10,000 mark that would trigger an automatic second-level approval from the finance department. The vendor was always the same. Apex Strategic Solutions, LLC. The description was always laughably vague. Project Consulting Services. Ben felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He'd been on the Titan project for 18 months. He knew every vendor, every contractor, every software license associated with it. He had never, not once, heard of Apex Strategic Solutions. He opened the detailed invoice PDFs attached to the expense reports. They were Spartan, generic templates, offering no real breakdown of services rendered. Just a logo, the vendor name, and a wire transfer address. The address wasn't a physical office building. It was a P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware, the anonymous heartland of shell corporations. His blood ran cold as he cross-referenced the dates. The payments to this phantom firm didn't align with any project milestones or deliverables. They were just a steady, rhythmic bleed, a financial parasite latched onto the company's books. Then he saw it, a detail that made the air in his lungs turn to ice. The very first payment to Apex Strategic Solutions was dated the exact same week his initial, confidential Project Titan viability memo had landed on Alistair's desk nearly 2 years ago. The name echoed in the silent office, a phantom in the machine, Apex Strategic Solutions. Ben's hands moved with a new, grim purpose, his fear being burned away by the cold fire of forensic curiosity. He opened a new browser window, enabling incognito mode out of a now-ingrained sense of paranoia. His fingers flew across the keyboard, the quiet clatter of the keys sounding like gunshots in the stillness. He searched state business registries, public records, anything that could put a face to the name. The results were predictably thin, designed to be that way. Apex was a registered LLC in Delaware, filed by a generic incorporation service that promised anonymity. There was a website, a cheap template-based affair filled with stock photos of smiling, ethnically diverse professionals pointing at whiteboards in sun-drenched offices. The corporate jargon was a meaningless word salad about synergizing forward-thinking paradigms and actualizing disruptive innovation. It was a digital ghost, a perfectly constructed facade of legitimacy designed to fool a cursory glance from an overworked accounts payable clerk. But Ben wasn't a clerk. He was an analyst who lived in the details. He right-clicked on the page, viewing the source code, digging through the metadata of the images. Nothing. It was a clean, sterile construction. He felt a surge of frustration, a dead end. But then, he remembered the invoices. He opened one of the PDFs again, zooming in on the low-resolution logo at the top. It was a simple, abstract design of a mountain peak. He ran a reverse image search. Nothing. It was likely a cheap logo bought from a stock graphics site. He was about to give up on that vector when he decided to download the logo file directly from the Apex website's media kit. A long shot. He opened the file's properties, clicking through the tabs until he found the metadata, the digital breadcrumbs left by the file's creator. And there, under the author field, was the name that made his heart stop. A. Vance. It took him a moment to place it, and then the memory surfaced from a long-forgotten office conversation about family. Vance was Alistair's mother's maiden name. The connection slammed into him with the force of a physical impact, winding him. A. Vance. Alistair Vance. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just stealing. He was doing it with a sneer, hiding in plain sight behind a thin veil of familial anonymity. The entire scheme was suddenly, horribly clear. Apex Strategic Solutions was Alistair. The consulting fees weren't for services rendered. They were a sophisticated kickback scheme. Alistair would approve the invoices, the company would pay his shell corporation, and the money would vanish into his personal accounts, laundered through the respectable-sounding name of a consulting firm. And the most sickening realization of all washed over Ben. Project Titan, his project, his intellectual labor, was the engine funding the entire fraud. The project's massive budget and complex financial models provided the perfect cover, the perfect smokescreen for Alistair to siphon off tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every late night Ben had spent, every weekend he had sacrificed, hadn't just been to enrich the company and build Alistair's reputation. It had been to line his pockets with stolen money. The personal betrayal of the stolen credit suddenly felt trivial, almost quaint compared to the calculated criminal enterprise he had just uncovered. The sadness that had been a dull ache in his chest for weeks finally evaporated, replaced by something crystalline and hard. This was no longer about his career. This was about a fundamental, systemic rot. He turned his attention back to the company server, his search terms now more specific. He typed Apex into the search bar for the shared finance drive. He expected nothing, but a single email chain, archived from over a year ago, appeared in the results. It was from a junior accountant, a young woman he vaguely remembered who had left the company abruptly. She had flagged an Apex invoice, politely questioning the lack of a detailed service agreement. Alistair's reply was curt and dismissive, but it was the final email in the chain, from a senior VP of Human Resources, that truly stopped his breath. The email from HR was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation, written in a language of polite, smiling menace. It was addressed to the young accountant, but its message was clearly for anyone who might ever read it. It began with platitudes, thanking her for her diligence and commitment to fiscal responsibility. It then smoothly pivoted, framing her legitimate query as a misunderstanding of complex strategic vendor relationships that were under the direct purview of senior leadership. The tone was patronizing, designed to make her feel small, naive, and out of her depth. It suggested that pursuing the matter further would demonstrate a lack of trust in her superiors and an inability to operate at the required level of discretion. Ben felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't just Alistair acting alone. This was an institutional cover-up. HR wasn't a protector of employees. They were the guardians of the system, the enforcers who cleaned up messes and ensured silence. The accountant had been silenced. Ben suddenly remembered the hushed whispers around her departure, a generous severance package, an ironclad NDA, and a swift, quiet exit. She hadn't just quit. She had been surgically removed before she could expose the rot. He now saw his own situation with terrifying clarity. The performance improvement plan being drafted against him wasn't just a tool to steal his work. It was the company's standard operating procedure for neutralizing a threat. They would discredit him, build a paper trail of incompetence, and then fire him for cause, ensuring he had no legal recourse, no credibility to become a whistleblower. He looked around the vast, dark office, at the empty desks and silent computers under the faint glow of the city lights. This entire building, this gleaming monument to modern capitalism, felt like a crime scene. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The weight of this knowledge, the sheer scale of the conspiracy, should have crushed him. Instead, it forged his anger into something cold, dense, and sharp. As he dragged the screenshot of the HR email into his encrypted folder on the thumb drive, he understood with absolute certainty that he was no longer building a defense for his career, but a prosecution that would dismantle Alistair's entire world. The PATH train ride back to Jersey City felt different. The familiar, bone-jarring rattle of the tracks was no longer a lullaby of exhaustion, but the rhythmic percussion of a ticking clock. The weight of the thumb drive in his pocket was immense, a dense, dark star of pure data that felt heavier than his entire messenger bag. When he finally stepped into his small apartment, the quiet felt oppressive, a vacuum where his thoughts could expand to fill every corner. He didn't turn on the television or heat up the leftover takeout in his fridge. Instead, he sat at his small IKEA desk, the city lights of Manhattan a glittering, indifferent tapestry across the river, and opened his personal laptop. The fatigue that had been his constant companion for years was gone, burned away by the white-hot fusion of adrenaline and rage. He was no longer a victim drifting in the corporate current. He was a strategist surveying a battlefield. His first search wasn't for jobs. It was for knowledge, for weapons. He pulled up his company's investor relations page and downloaded the full, unredacted annual report. He spent an hour studying the corporate governance section, memorizing the names on the audit committee and the board of directors, cross-referencing them on LinkedIn, building a mental map of their careers, their connections, their reputations. He then found the company's internal whistleblower policy, a bland, reassuring document filled with promises of non-retaliation that he now knew, thanks to the accountant's ghost, were utter lies. But within the jargon, he found the mechanism, a direct, confidential reporting line to the audit committee chair. It was a kill switch, designed to bypass the compromised internal chain of command. For the next 3 hours, he meticulously organized the evidence on his thumb drive into a single, devastatingly coherent PDF. He titled it Project Titan, IP Provenance and Governance Review. He didn't just dump the files, he curated them, annotating each document with a cold, precise summary of its significance. The doctored risk analysis, the fraudulent PIP, the Apex invoices, the email from HR. It was a self-contained narrative of a multi-layered crime. At 3:17 a.m., with the first hint of gray lightening the eastern sky, he opened a new browser tab and typed, Top Employment Lawyers NYC Sarbanes-Oxley. He wasn't just looking for an advocate, he was looking for an architect who could help him build the gallows. The law office was a world away from the gleaming, impersonal towers of Hudson Yards. Located in a pre-war building just south of Bryant Park, the space was cramped, filled with overflowing bookshelves and the distinct, comforting smell of old paper and strong coffee. Sarah Jenkins was nothing like the sleek corporate attorneys he'd seen at his own company. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb everything, and a no-nonsense demeanor that radiated competence. She didn't offer platitudes or expressions of shock as Ben, his voice low and steady, walked her through the evidence he had organized on his laptop. She listened in absolute silence, her fingers steepled, her gaze fixed on the screen. She scrolled through the time-stamped scans of his moleskin, the corresponding emails to Alistair, the side-by-side comparison of his original risk analysis versus the doctored version, and the chain of payments to Apex Strategic Solutions. When he finally finished with the screenshot of the HR email and the story of the silenced accountant, she let out a slow, measured breath. "They didn't just steal your work, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice a gravelly instrument of pure pragmatism. "They've committed wire fraud, falsified business records, and are in blatant violation of SEC regulations regarding internal controls. Your personal grievance, while entirely justified, is the least of their problems. This," she tapped the screen displaying the Apex invoices, "is a shareholder lawsuit waiting to happen." She explained the landscape with brutal clarity. A direct lawsuit from him would be slow, costly, and would likely be buried by the company's army of lawyers. The NDA he signed was a formidable weapon, but the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, passed in the wake of corporate scandals like Enron, was his shield and his sword. It offered robust protections for whistleblowers who reported fraud to a federal agency, or, crucially, to a person with supervisory authority. She laid out the strategy. They would not sue. They would disclose. They would present the meticulously prepared dossier not to HR, not to the CEO, but directly to the one body legally obligated to act independently, the Audit Committee. She warned him that the moment he hit send, his life at the company would be over, but that this was the only path to ensure they couldn't simply buy his silence and bury the crime. Her final advice was a cold splash of water. Assume every single person you work with, every manager, every friendly face in the break room, is a potential agent of the company whose primary job is to protect it from you. Armed with Sarah's counsel, Ben's world resolved into a stark binary focus. There were assets and there were threats. The office, once a familiar landscape, now felt like hostile territory. Every polite "good morning" seemed to carry a hidden question. Every glance from a colleague felt like surveillance. He moved through his days with a placid, unreadable expression, a mask of the diligent, slightly downtrodden analyst he had always been. He delivered his work on time, answered Alistair's emails with professional brevity, and sat through meetings with a zen-like calm, his mind miles away, wargaming his next move. His focus was on the hidden network, the ghost infrastructure of relationships and past allegiances that existed outside the official org chart. His first target was David Chen. The former COO had been pushed out in a strategic restructuring about 18 months ago, a quiet coup orchestrated by the current CEO. Ben remembered David as a sharp, numbers-driven executive who had once publicly praised one of Ben's early analytical models in a town hall, a rare moment of recognition that had sustained him for months. David was old school, a believer in fiscal integrity, who had likely chafed under the new leadership's focus on style over substance. Finding him was the challenge. Ben spent an evening scouring old alumni networks and professional association member lists until he found a personal email address. He labored over the message for an hour, writing and rewriting, knowing it could be perceived as a desperate plea from a disgruntled employee. He settled on something oblique, professional, and respectful of David's time. "Dear Mr. Chen," he wrote, "I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to request the brief opportunity to seek your perspective on some complex risk management methodologies I've been developing, particularly concerning governance and internal control validation. Your insights during your tenure were always invaluable. It was a carefully chosen lure, using the language of their shared profession to signal a much deeper problem without creating a discoverable record of conspiracy." He hit send, his heart pounding, expecting no reply. For 2 days, there was only silence. Then, on Friday morning, a notification popped up on his phone. A new email. The sender was David Chen. The body of the message contained only 2 words. The calendar invitation appeared in his inbox on Monday afternoon, its sterile blue header feeling like a death sentence. Subject: Performance Review Follow-Up. Attendees: Alistair Vance, Martha Ryland, HR Business Partner, Ben Carter. It was scheduled for Wednesday. The PIP was coming. The gears of the termination machine were grinding into motion. An earlier version of himself would have been paralyzed by fear, his stomach churning with acid, his nights sleepless with anxiety. But the man who read that email was different. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a cold, clear sense of purpose. He accepted the invitation without comment. He now had a deadline. This was the precipice, and he needed to secure his own lines before he went over the edge. That evening, he didn't work on the dossier. He worked on his own survival. He methodically updated his resume, translating his complex work on Project Titan into a series of powerful, quantifiable achievements, using industry-standard language that was both impressive and vague enough to avoid breaching his NDA. Developed predictive risk models for M&A due diligence, identifying potential volatility impacts valued at over $50 million. Led granular data analysis for a strategic initiative projected to increase enterprise value by 15%. He then activated a dormant part of his network, sending a carefully worded text to a former colleague, a woman named Chloe, who he had mentored before she left for a rival fintech firm. "Hey Chloe, hope you're well. Catching up with a few folks to get a sense of the market. Would be great to hear what you're working on when you have a spare moment." It was the universally understood corporate code for "I'm looking." While he worked, a background process on his laptop was running, a military-grade file shredder, permanently erasing any personal data from the company-issued machine, from old tax documents in his downloads folder to his browser history. He was methodically sanitizing his digital footprint, preparing the machine for its eventual return. He was detaching, piece by piece, from the identity the company had given him. As he shut down the laptop, the screen going dark, he felt a profound and unsettling sense of lightness, the feeling of a soldier stripping down to fighting weight before the final decisive battle. The coffee shop was a small, independent place in Soho, a neighborhood so far removed from the corporate canyons of Hudson Yards that it felt like another city. David Chen looked older than Ben remembered, less constrained by the sharp tailoring of a C-suite executive's suit. He wore a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, but his eyes were as sharp and analytical as ever. He listened without interruption as Ben, speaking in a low, measured tone, laid out the entire story, from the stolen moleskin to the Apex Shell Company and the HR cover-up. He didn't show Ben the dossier itself, but described its contents with forensic precision. When Ben finished, David stirred his espresso for a long, silent moment, the tiny clink of the spoon against ceramic the only sound between them. "I'm not surprised," David said finally, his voice laced with a weary resignation. Alistair was always a salesman, not a strategist, and the current leadership rewards salesmanship above all else. He then provided the crucial piece of intelligence that Ben could never have found on his own: the internal political map of the board. He explained that the CEO was protected by a faction of board members who were invested in his vision of rapid, aggressive growth. However, the chair of the audit committee, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, was an appointee from their largest institutional investor, a massive pension fund with a zero-tolerance policy for governance failures that could expose them to liability. "Eleanor doesn't care about office politics," David explained. "She cares about fiduciary duty and shareholder value. A scandal like this, especially the fraud, could trigger a stock price collapse and regulatory investigations that would make her investors furious." He gave Ben Eleanor's direct personal email address, one she used for her private equity work, completely bypassing the corporate servers. "Frame this as a material risk to the company's financial statements and a catastrophic failure of internal controls. Don't make it about your stolen credit. Make it about their money and their legal exposure." As they stood to leave, David placed a hand on Ben's shoulder. "Timing is everything. Send it at 5 a.m. on the morning of the next quarterly earnings call. The board will be assembled, the pressure will be at its absolute maximum, and they won't have time to circle the wagons and bury it before the market opens." The conference room designated for employee relations was on a lower floor, windowless, and smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and anxiety. It was a sterile beige box designed for difficult conversations, a place where careers came to die. Martha Ryland from HR sat opposite him, a woman whose entire professional demeanor was a carefully constructed fortress of pleasant neutrality. Her smile was perfectly symmetrical, her blazer a non-threatening shade of blue, and her voice a smooth, practiced monotone that betrayed no emotion whatsoever. Alistair, by contrast, was practically vibrating with a smug, predatory energy. He lounged in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, the polished leather of his Italian loafer catching the harsh fluorescent light. He didn't look at Ben. He looked at a point just past his shoulder, as if addressing a subordinate who was already fading from view. Martha slid a thick document, bound in a cheap plastic cover, across the polished table. "Ben," she began, her voice a soothing balm of corporate doublespeak. "As you know, We are constantly evaluating performance to ensure alignment with our strategic objectives. Following feedback from your direct supervisor, we've identified some areas for development and have prepared a performance improvement plan to help you succeed. Alistair finally deigned to speak, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. This isn't a punishment, Ben. It's a lifeline. It's a structured path for you to elevate your contributions from the purely tactical to the strategic, something we've discussed. Ben felt a strange, cold calm settle over him. He looked at the document. Performance Improvement Plan, Ben Carter. It was the exact text he had seen on Alistair's drive, a pre-written verdict. He met Alistair's gaze, his own expression a carefully blank canvas. He said nothing, letting the silence stretch, forcing them to fill it. He could see a flicker of annoyance in Alistair's eyes. This wasn't the reaction of a panicked, broken man. This was something else. Finally, Alistair sighed, the sound theatrical and impatient, and pushed a second, much thinner stack of papers across the table. If you are enjoying this story of betrayal and calculated justice, please like this video. It helps us bring you more stories like this. Or, Alistair said, leaning forward, the pretense of mentorship dissolving to reveal the cold, hard predator beneath. We can acknowledge that this role is perhaps no longer the right fit. We can accelerate the process. Ben looked down at the new documents. The header was stark and unambiguous. Separation agreement and general release. The PIP had been a lie, a piece of theater to establish a fraudulent paper trail. This was the real purpose of the meeting. This was the execution. Martha Ryland cleared her throat, her HR programming kicking back in. The company has decided to move in a different direction with the senior analyst role. Your termination is effective immediately. She slid a finger down the page, pointing to a paragraph. This is a for-cause termination, based on the performance issues previously documented. Ben felt a surge of something that wasn't anger, but a profound, almost exhilarating clarity. The documented issues were the very lies Alistair had drafted in the PIP. The lack of strategic vision, the failure to elevate data. It was a perfectly closed loop of deceit. He scanned the agreement. The severance package was an insult. 2 weeks' pay. In exchange, the company demanded everything. He would have to sign an ironclad NDA, a non-disparagement clause that would prevent him from ever speaking a word about his time there, and a general release waiving any and all rights to future legal action. It was a muzzle, a gag, a legal document designed to erase him and his contributions completely. He slowly turned a page, his movements deliberate, feigning the shell-shocked confusion they expected. He paused, his finger landing on a specific subclause within the NDA, a dense block of legalese about the definition of confidential information. He looked up, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. Could you just clarify this section for me? It defines company intellectual property as including all concepts and strategies developed during my employment, regardless of their formal adoption. I just want to understand what that covers. The question hung in the airless room, simple, direct, and utterly devastating in its implication. It wasn't the question of a defeated man. It was the question of a man establishing the terms of a future deposition. A flicker of something. Was it panic? Crossed Martha's face before her professional mask slammed back into place. She exchanged a glance with Alistair, a micro-expression so fleeting that anyone else would have missed it. But Ben didn't miss it. He saw the silent, panicked communication. He knows. He's laying a trap. Alistair, however, was too deep in his own triumphant narrative to see the danger. He saw Ben's question not as a threat, but as the last gasp of a drowning man, a pathetic attempt to cling to some shred of relevance. He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "It covers everything, Ben," he said, spreading his hands wide, a gesture of magnanimous finality. "Every idea you had in this building belongs to the company. Project Titan was a corporate initiative I spearheaded. Your analytical work was a contribution, a valuable one, but a contribution nonetheless. That's what you were paid for." He leaned back, the picture of untouchable authority. "Sign the papers, take the severance. It's the only way you walk out of here with a neutral reference. It would be a profound shame for your inability to see the bigger picture to tarnish your reputation across the industry. Think of your future." The threat was no longer veiled, it was a bludgeon. Ben let the silence sit for a moment longer, then nodded slowly, a perfect imitation of a man beaten into submission. "I understand," he said, his voice hollow. "I'll need to review this. I'll let you know my decision tomorrow." He stood up, his movements stiff, and allowed Martha to hand him a flat, brown cardboard box containing the meager contents of his desk. the final, humiliating prop in their corporate play. Real value isn't found in a job title or the gleam of a luxury watch. It's built in the quiet hours, in the integrity of your work and the strength of your character. Status can be stripped away in an instant, but what you stand for is yours forever. What do you think is the most satisfying form of justice in a situation like this? Let us know in the comments below. The walk of shame from the HR conference room to the elevator was a masterclass in feigned defeat. Ben kept his eyes fixed on the worn carpet, the cardboard box clutched in his arms like a shield. He could feel the stares of his former colleagues, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and the palpable relief that it wasn't them. He didn't look up. He didn't acknowledge them. He played the part of the vanquished employee to perfection. The soft chime of the elevator arriving was a sound of escape, as the polished steel doors slid shut, sealing him off from the 48th floor for the last time. His reflection stared back at him, a pale, tired man holding a box of office supplies. But the reflection in the steel was a lie. The moment the doors closed, his posture changed. The slump in his shoulders straightened. The look of vacant shock in his eyes sharpened into a hard, diamond-like focus. He set the box down, the contents rattling. A cheap company mug, a stapler, a framed photo of his parents. It was all meaningless detritus. He reached into the pocket of his blazer, his fingers closing around the cool, metallic casing of his smartphone. He didn't open his email or his contact list. He opened the native voice recording app. There, at the top of the list, was a new file, its duration marked at 17 minutes, 42 seconds. He had pressed record the moment he had stepped into that beige room, the phone lying face down on the table next to his notepad. He had a perfect, high-fidelity recording of the entire meeting. Martha's scripted HR speak, Alistair's condescending monologue, and most importantly, the clear, unambiguous threat against his future career. He scrolled to the bottom of his screen and opened another app, a secure file-sharing service. He uploaded the audio file, renaming it Exhibit F Termination Meeting Audio, M4AA, and added it to the folder titled Project Titan, IP Provenance and Governance Review. As the elevator reached the ground floor, the doors opening to the vast, indifferent marble lobby, he slid the phone back into his pocket, a cold, grim smile touching his lips for the first time all day. Alistair thought he had controlled the narrative, but he had only been dictating his own confession. The quarterly earnings call was scheduled for 8:30 a.m. At 7:01 a.m., from a sterile table at a Pret-a-Manger 2 blocks from his old office, Ben hit send. The dossier, a digital bomb of meticulously organized evidence, was dispatched to the personal email addresses of Eleanor Vance, the chair of the audit committee, and David Chen's contact, the chief operating officer. For the next hour, he nursed a single black coffee, watching the city wake up through the plate glass window, feeling a strange and profound sense of detachment. He was no longer a participant, merely an observer of the shockwave he had created. At 8:17 a.m., his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Boardroom, 49th floor, now. He walked back into the building, his old keycard surprisingly still active, a sign of administrative oversight that felt like a small, ironic victory. When he stepped into the main boardroom, the atmosphere was glacial. The CEO, the CLO, the COO, and Eleanor Vance were seated around the massive mahogany table, their faces grim, like figures in a Renaissance painting of a tribunal. In the center of the table sat a thick, spiral-bound copy of his dossier. Alistair was there, standing by the window, his back to the room, looking out over the city. He turned as Ben entered, a look of pure, venomous fury on his face, quickly masked by a strained, confident smile. He clearly thought this was his moment of final triumph, a chance to publicly crucify the subordinate who had dared to challenge him. "Glad you could make it, Ben," the CEO said, his voice strained. Alistair was just about to walk us through some of the finer points of the Titan strategy's evolution. Alistair stepped forward, all practiced charm and authority. He launched into his well-rehearsed pitch, a symphony of corporate jargon about synergy, disruption, and shareholder value. He was articulate, polished, and utterly convincing to anyone who hadn't seen the raw data. Eleanor Vance let him speak for a full 5 minutes before she held up a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. Her voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "That's the summary, Mr. Vance. We've all read it. What I want to hear, in your own words, is the process, the genesis. Take us back to the very first hypothesis." Alistair faltered. Ben watched as the smooth, confident mask began to crack. He couldn't articulate the process because he had never been part of it. He stammered, grasped for words, and then, with a surge of desperate arrogance, he puffed out his chest. "It was my vision," he declared, his voice a little too loud. "I connected the dots." The room fell into a dead silence, the accusation hanging in the air, and every eye in that room, cold and expectant, slowly turned to Ben. If you are enjoying this story of betrayal and calculated justice, please like this video. It helps us bring you more stories like this. Ben let the silence stretch, a weapon in itself. He didn't look at Alistair. He looked directly into the unflinching eyes of Eleanor Vance, the only person in the room who truly mattered. He kept his voice low, steady, and devoid of emotion. A simple statement of fact. "He didn't connect the dots," Ben said. "He just photocopied the picture." The words landed with the clean, devastating impact of a sniper's bullet. He saw the effect ripple across Alistair's face in slow motion, the confident smirk dissolving, the blood draining away to leave a pale, waxy sheen, the sudden, minute tremor in his hand as it rested on the back of a leather chair. The light in his eyes, once so full of arrogant fire, simply went out. He opened his mouth to protest, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. It was over. Eleanor Vance gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to the chief legal officer. The CLO slid a slim folder across the polished table towards Alistair. It wasn't a bonus plan or a new contract. It was a formal notice of indefinite suspension, pending the results of a full forensic audit by an external firm. "Your network access has been revoked," the CLO stated, his voice a flat, unemotional blade. "Security will escort you from the building. You are not to contact any employees or access any company property. Is that understood?" As if on cue, two uniformed security guards, men Ben had only ever seen manning the lobby desk, entered the room. They didn't touch Alistair, but they didn't have to. Their presence was a physical manifestation of his fall from grace. He was no longer an executive. He was a liability being removed from the premises. He gathered his phone and wallet from the table, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume on a broken mannequin. He wouldn't meet Ben's gaze. As the doors clicked shut behind him, the palpable tension in the room was replaced by a cold, transactional calm. The board members looked at Ben now, their expressions a complex cocktail of respect, wariness, and raw calculation. He was no longer the invisible analyst. He was a newly discovered asset, or perhaps a new kind of threat. The chief legal officer then slid a second, much thicker document across the table toward him, its cover page bearing only the company logo and a single, ominous word: agreement. 6 months later, the air in Ben's office didn't have the recycled, refrigerated chill of a skyscraper. It was on the 3rd floor of a historic cast-iron building in Soho, and it smelled of old wood, strong coffee from the small Italian cafe downstairs, and the faint, sharp scent of ink from the architectural blueprints they'd been reviewing. He was a partner now. Carter and Chen Analytics. David Chen, lured out of a restless retirement by the prospect of building something with integrity from the ground up, had been his first and only call. Their firm was lean, just 6 of them, but they were already profitable. Their client list a curated collection of venture capital firms and private equity groups that valued surgical precision over slick PowerPoints. The company-issued Dell was a distant memory, replaced by a custom-built machine with a silent cooling system and a monitor so crisp it made data feel tangible. His compensation was no longer a fixed number on a bi-weekly paycheck, a wage for his time. It was equity, a direct mathematical share in the value he created. The profound, soul-deep exhaustion that had been his constant companion for years had finally receded, replaced by the focused, invigorating fatigue that comes from building something that is wholly your own. A news alert popped up in the corner of his screen, a headline from a major financial journal. He clicked. The Securities and Exchange Commission had concluded its investigation. Alistair Vance, permanently barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company, faced federal indictment for wire fraud and conspiracy. The article detailed how the company, under the Audit Committee's direction, had invoked its clawback provisions, suing to reclaim 7 years of bonuses, a sum totaling over $8 million that had been funded, Ben knew, by the very strategies he had architected. There was a photo of Alistair leaving the courthouse, a stark, grainy image taken with a long lens. The Italian wool suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled, off-the-rack blazer that hung awkwardly on his diminished frame. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a haunted, hollow-eyed stare into the middle distance. He looked not just defeated, but fundamentally erased, a ghost of the powerful man he had so convincingly pretended to be. Ben felt no surge of vindictive pleasure, only a profound, quiet stillness, the feeling of a long, complex equation finally resolving to zero. He realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that Alistair hadn't been a monster of corporate greed, but merely a vacuum that had been filled by it, a hollow man who had finally imploded under the weight of his own emptiness. Ben reached for the old moleskin notebook, which now sat on a corner of his new desk, not as a tool for daily work, but as a monument, a kind of touchstone. Its worn cover and frayed elastic band were a testament to a battle he had never sought but had been forced to win. He ran a thumb over the soft, textured paper, the ghost of 1,000 frantic equations and late-night diagrams still faintly visible in the indentations. He thought of Alistair's Patek Philippe, the Porsche, the Tribeca loft, all the glittering, expensive armor of a man who had nothing of substance to protect. It was a masterful performance of success, a carefully curated illusion designed to distract from the fundamental absence of value within. Ben's own value, he now understood, had been hidden in the spidery scrawl within that notebook, in the messy, frustrating, and ultimately glorious process of true creation. He had learned that a person's worth isn't in the bonus check or the job title, though the settlement he'd reached with the company had been substantial, enough to seed this new venture and secure his future, but in the absolute ownership of one's own intellectual fire. The justice he had secured wasn't a chaotic act of revenge, it was a clinical and systemic correction. He hadn't leaked the story to a journalist or posted an anonymous screed online. He had used the system's own instruments, the audit committee, the whistleblower policies, the rigid legal framework of corporate governance, to hold it accountable to its own stated principles. He had forced the machine to purge itself of a cancer. It was a quieter, harder, and far more permanent form of victory. The difference between burning down a house and methodically foreclosing on its fraudulent mortgage. He looked out the large window at the vibrant, chaotic, human-scale life of the street below, a world away from the sterile, silent, godlike view from the 48th floor. He had traded a view from the heavens for a place on the ground. He opened a new notebook, its pages crisp and blank, and picked up a pen, the weight of it familiar and comforting in his hand. His greatest work wasn't the Titan strategy that had almost destroyed him, but the unwritten pages that lay before him now, a future he would author himself, on his own terms. He finally understood that a person's real legacy was not the credit they could claim, but the quiet, unshakable integrity they refused to surrender.